spoke off the record for a moment, but now that we are recording, um, I one of the topics we discussed before doing this collaboration was I wanted to talk about race and racism in Ecuador. I wanted, for obvious reasons, I wanted to know your experiences, and I wanted to share with you some of mine. Now, I'm married into a mostly European upper middle class family in Ecuador, and that exposes me to a little bit of a different world that I'm used to. And some ideas as an American were shocking. It took some time to understand why people would have the attitudes they have here and say some of the things they say. And my opinion about Ecuador is, and a lot of places outside the US that don't have our history, is that expressing some very shocking racist ideas or concepts or just saying just abhorrent stuff, it doesn't have the same taboo. And as an example, and my wife, if she watches this, she might get mad at me for revealing this, but we were on the North Coast during Carnival, and my mother-in-law was on the beach, and she came running back to our house scared, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "There's too many black people on the beach," and she was terrified. And like I was horrified by her having that attitude, and it has taken me a lot of time living here and understanding the culture to understand the perspective and what people really mean when they say things like that, and where they're coming from, and their lack of understanding of our history and why we would be offended by something like that or think it's terrible. At the same time, so Ecuador is extremely diverse. Like, people think, oh, it's this mestizo country. It's a bunch of Latinos. It's not. You've got the Esmeraldas region that is mostly Afro-Ecuadorian, and culturally really interesting because it's that part of the country that the original people there were from a couple slave ships that mutinied. They mutinied and they crashed on that coast and prospered there. They became the dominant people in that region. And you have the indigenous people who have a long history of oppression and suffering. And in more recent years, and probably you've experienced some of the paros here, in more recent years, a history of fighting back, of resisting. And you have the mestizo culture that lacks the understanding that we have as Americans, and sometimes expresses things that we find shocking. It is very normal to express some pretty racist ideas here and to exhibit some pretty racist behavior, but because there is, in my opinion, because there is that outlet, because people can say the racist shit they think or feel, it doesn't build into the extreme racial hatred that exists in a lot of parts of the U.S. There's an outlet. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. Um, it's just different. It's different, and I wanted to talk to you about your experiences here. What surprised you? What shocked you? What has pissed you off? And what has been cool?
I'll start with like the obvious things that may have, pissed me and my wife off just a little bit, and it's just the like look down your nose kind of attitude towards indigenous and Afro Ecuadorians, and you see that from like the more European Ecuadorians,
Yeah.
and I also see that I guess the bad side is I see, and I haven't seen. I'm not gonna say I've seen a lot of examples of this, but I've seen like expats who keep that same attitude, like they adopt that attitude almost, and then at some point they look down on every Ecuadorian. It doesn't matter where they're from, but
Right.
I have seen it. Like it's fairly obvious that you never see almost never see an Afro Ecuadorian or an indigenous person working at like a bank or a government office or anything like that. It's always some kind of service job or something. And it reminds me a lot of the Middle East,
Yeah.
where all of the workers are from outside of the Middle East. They're all from like,
India and
Pakistan
Philippines. Yeah.
or India or Bangladesh, Philippines,
Right.
Ethiopia, um,
And they're
and
treated like
the
shit.
way that right. And the one thing I learned going into the Middle East is that you really learn how arrogant we are as Americans when you see another culture that's equally as arrogant.
Right.
And
It's,
like
it's an
the
ugly mirror.
wealthy Arabs,
It's an ugly
right?
mirror.
the, the the wealthy or more wealthier Arab people are very arrogant, and they're a lot like us. And when you
Yeah.
see it, you're like, oh my god, that is that how we're seen around the world? And it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's that's one of the things that maybe like upset us a little bit when we first came here, is that like, yeah, we didn't see brown faces doing the things that we would see the lighter faces doing. And we're like, oh man, like if only these folks knew that, like, even in the United States, with all the racism that there is in the United States, and like hatred, like, and it's like a hatred thing, you will still see people of color in any position that you would see a white person in. But here it's not like that, and it's so accepted. It's almost like the
It's normalized.
Afro Ecuadorian, right? The Afros and the indigenous. It's almost like they accept it as normal, even though I know that they will want those things. It's like they almost feel like relegated to that, and they're okay with it to an extent, because it's I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing to experience.
It's a little too entrenched for them to even
Yeah.
consider the possibility of resisting.
Right. Right.
It's
And
just
I think
it's just
that's
the
one of the
reality they
reasons.
know. And
Right.
like, I don't, you know, I'm not going to try to fight the mountain behind me. It's bigger than me,
Right.
and it's just there. And I think sadly for a lot of the Afro Ecuadorians, it's a similar reality where they're not going to try to fight that mountain because it just, why would they?
Right. Right. And I feel for a lot of them. We've had some dealings. We met some actual like Afro Ecuadorians, and talking to them and listening to their experiences, it's like it's mind blowing to me that, like, one lady told us, and she only spoke Spanish, but she told us that she was amazed because someone that we were with was a African American, but he spoke Spanish, and she said, he's the first black person I ever met that spoke English. And it just like it blew my mind. But then when I think about it, like, they only really hang out in their communities, because when we go out and about, we almost never see the Afro Ecuadorians. Like, we almost never see them at the mall.
Right.
We never see them in taxis. And it's like they're in their own little communities, and we don't really get to see them that often. And
Right.
it's you
And
almost think they weren't here.
like, as someone here that has kids here, education, like a real education in Ecuador, is really expensive. It's expensive.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you are from a marginalized community, your kids are not going to learn English. They're
Right.
not. The opportunity doesn't exist. And so, I'm curious if you've had situations, interactions with Ecuadorians where it was one thing, and then you open your mouth and they realized you were an American, and that switch flipped.
Okay. So I'm going to say this. I don't know if there was like a blatantly obvious situation where that happened. Typically, everywhere I go, my wife is with me. So she has been mistaken many times. My wife has dreadlocks, so she's been mistaken many times for like a Colombian.
Right.
Like, people think she's, maybe an Afro Colombian, and they'll start speaking to her or even me in Spanish, because I think a lot of times, because of where we are, people automatically assume that we're like Colombian or something like
Right.
that. So they usually treat me like I'm just another Spanish speaking person here.
Right.
Also, now, what's happened is, like, someone may be speaking to her, or I don't know, no one's ever mistreated us. I'm not going to say anyone's ever mistreated us, but I do notice that it's different once they realize that we're American. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Um, once I start saying, poquito español, or whatever, um,
Right.
it also helps that I'm like 6'1", I'm 250, and I don't look like the typical Latin American guy to begin with.
Right. You you
So
you
that
you you
also
have a clear expat look.
right, and I don't like that, but
It just is
I
what it
don't like to
is.
stick out that way, right? And it's one of those things where like, no, I can say that it's probably because of the way that I look that we don't get that blatant like mistreatment or anything like that.
Right.
Because I don't know, like even if someone like I know there's situations where someone could have possibly maybe had an attitude or something with me. I don't do anything. I don't, I'm really laid back, but like they would choose not to just by looking at me. So like that's what I'm saying. Like I can't say I've experienced that.
Right.
I have a
You
built-in
don't look like,
shield, maybe. I don't know.
yeah. You have a persona that kind of protects you from some being fucked with. Excuse
Exactly.
my language.
That's
Right.
exactly my word. Yeah. No, you're
Right.
right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that like when it comes to our experience though, we haven't. I can't say we've been like mistreated. Now I do know that like when we get on a bus, or if we're certain places we're sitting down, like people might not sit next to us by default. And I don't know. I don't even think it's like a hatred thing. I think it's just like something they do by default.
So there's
I don't.
from talking to my family here, there's a huge amount of fear.
Yeah.
I mean that tends to be the root of all racial hatred, right? Is just fear. Like talking to my mother-in-law and talking to other European Ecuadorians, their attitude, their fear, like first of all, they believe they don't really know about the history of the Afro Ecuadorians that came here originally, but they know about the waves of immigration. They know about the Colombians and the Cubans and the Venezuelans, and so they link all these together, and they link them all together and just think crime. Um, that kind of ties into another topic, which is the prejudice against Venezuelans here.
Right.
Some of it perhaps justified because you have a culture that came out of a very violent society, a society where violent crime was normalized, and they carried that here with them. And some of it completely unjustified, and it's just pure prejudice against another immigrant group. Um, you know, all lies have some truth to them, um,
Yeah.
and but mostly it's a bunch of just racist bullshit. But
Right.
the the attitude is that I have heard from that strata of society in Quito is, oh, the black people here they're Colombian criminals and they're Cuban criminals and they're Venezuelan criminals,
Yeah.
and that is so they are afraid, they're scared that they're going to get robbed. So it's very similar to the sometimes the open minded, or at least think they're open minded American that still crosses the street when they see someone that spooks them, right? Like
Right.
it's fear. It's racism built on fear, not hatred, but fear and hatred kind of blend together pretty quickly.
Yeah, they do. And I think,
Um,
to your point, it's, there's a lot, of course, there's a lot of Venezuelan immigrants and stuff here. And you do see them, some of them like, homeless and just kind of walk around with backpacks and stuff like that. I can't say that like, all of them, I wouldn't want to put them in that bag of being like criminals because I see them all
right,
working most of the time.
right,
And it's just like immigration in the States where, for years people had an issue with like Mexican immigrants. But I'm like, well, when's the last time you saw a Mexican immigrant that wasn't working
right,
and contributing to, something in that area that they live?
right. Very hardworking people.
Right.
There is also a terrible, ugly reality that desperation leads to doing desperate things. And when
Exactly.
people are
Yeah.
desperate, um, that is part of the reality. And it has reasons.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something a couple minutes back about attitudes of expats here, and that might be a good tie into something else we wanted to talk about, which is the expat community here, their attitudes, their
Yeah.
behaviors, their beliefs, um, and some of the other people putting out YouTube videos um, in English. Some of the expats here, some of them real straightforward and putting out honest videos. Others that are in little expat bubbles, and their videos are honest, but they're from a very narrow perspective where they don't
Yeah.
see everything.
Yeah.
And there's always a few that they have financial interest here. They've invested heavily. I've invested heavily here, but I try to tell it like I see it.
Yeah.
So some other folks that might paint a rosier picture than is real because they've got a house they want to sell, or a
Right.
farm,
Yeah. Yeah.
or whatever. So I think there's a broad spectrum of reasons um, and realities here, but um, part of what got me watching your channel and wanting to reach out and talk to you was a fairly down to earth, realistic expat perspective here, and um, that can be a little rare, especially because the vast majority of expats here are in Cuenca or Bicabamba or places like that where they're being perfectly honest about their experience, but it doesn't reflect the rest of the country and the experience the rest of us are having, especially during this crisis. Um, and they can paint a deceptively rosy picture of Ecuador
Yeah.
unintentionally for the most part.
Yeah.
Um, and then also just the broad spectrum of attitudes from different Ecuadorians here, or different expats here, about the culture. I mean, I there's another channel I watch, and they had a little YouTube short, a clip where they said something really profound about people that they move to Ecuador because they are fearful. They live in the U.S. and they're fearful about the government. They're fearful about the collapse of U.S. society and what the dollar is doing, and blah 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 blah. They live in fear, so they move away from Ecuador. They move to, or they move away from the United States. They move to Ecuador, but their culture of fear comes with them. They get here
Mm-hmm.
and they attract that reality around them because that's what they know, and that's the
Yeah.
mindset they're stuck in. So I
Yeah.
see that a lot. Expats that move here and they fail here. They they end up moving away again because they are people who just live in fear and moved
Yeah.
here because they were fearful of there and moved away because they were fearful of here. Um,
Yeah.
like I'm in a couple different expat groups, the Ecuador expat group on Facebook, but also one for Brazil, one for Colombia, some other places that I at one point considered moving. We probably have a more mature, like both in age, but also in attitudes and behaviors, expat community here than those other places do. Different places attract different kinds of people. So if you've
Yeah.
like dropped in on the expat group in Colombia, um, you've got sex tourists, you've got
It's all passport bros and yeah.
right, passport bros, extreme racism, people that are there but hate the Colombians, and
Yeah.
they're just some very abusive people. And the same with Brazil. Some people that they've moved to this place because there's something there they want, but um, their attitudes are pretty toxic. And
Yeah.
I see that less in Ecuador. I think we have a better expat community here because um, Ecuador doesn't have a reputation for sex tourism. It doesn't have a reputation as a destination, or at least it didn't used to go to get drugs.
Yeah.
It's not a party location. It's chill. So
Yeah.
um, there was a famous quote by General Bolivar, like going way back in history, talking about Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but I think the gist of it stands, and that he described Venezuela as a military barracks, Colombia as a college dorm, and Ecuador as a monastery. So um, there is that it's still somewhat true. Like those attitudes in the culture are true, and those different cultures attract those different types of expats.
Yeah.
So um, you got a lot of people going to Colombia for the party scene, and you have people going to Ecuador to relax, to experience nature, and to just chill out. I'd like to hear your thoughts and your experiences with the spectrum of the different types of expats here and the behaviors.
Well, speaking on the spectrum, there's people on both ends, both extremes. Um, the people that see it as a utopia, and the people that see it as a Mad Max hellscape. And there's like it's that spectrum. The problem is people get in their own echo chambers
Right,
where, like you said, if there's a group in Cuenca and everything's perfectly fine there in that group, then they're going to think everything is perfectly fine everywhere. And you could say the same thing like uh, the city that we came from in Virginia is Newport News, right? Newport News kind of has a bad reputation. And the thing is, and I worked in criminal justice for a long time. I know where the crime was. It was pretty much all over the place, but it wasn't nearly as bad as some people would think that it was because of certain echo chambers that say, "Oh, you don't live in Newport News. It's terrible. It's this and this and that." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like,
right.
this city is safe. I can go anywhere in this city and be perfect fine. The part of town that y'all say is bad, I go down there and go fishing all the time. So it's all about like perspective. If you only hear one side of a story over and over again, that becomes your narrative. And for us, growing up in kind of a bad neighborhood, and I've been all over the place. I was a military brat, so I've been in bad neighborhoods, good ones. Um, like I said, I've worked around criminals, and I know what they target. I know what they do, and I know that when people say like crime is really bad, it's all about perspective. Like, it's bad in what way? So like here, you get your robbery. Somebody walk up to you with a gun, steal your phone, this and that. That's not good. That's not good. And it makes it difficult for you to do some of the things you may want to do, have some of the freedom that you want to have. That being said, I'd still take that scenario from being robbed in the US. Because in the US, someone robs you, there's much more likely chance they're still going to shoot you.
Right,
All right. Because there's a much greater chance they're going to get caught.
right.
And knowing that they're going to get caught and get at least 25 years for the robbery, 3 years for the gun, and you know, they're like, well, screw it, 25 years is life anyway. I might as well kill this guy and maybe get away with it. On the off chance. Here, there's a good chance they probably won't get caught. They're not trying to kill you. They're really not trying to kill you.
They're trying to
It
make a
doesn't
quick
make
buck.
it better, right?
Yeah,
Um, so like, yeah, it's all about perspective. I know the way that me and my wife see things, and we grew up different than a lot of the expats that are here. And I don't like to say like, oh, I had a rough back. I didn't have a rough background, but I can definitely say that like dirt roads don't bother me as much as some people. Um, the Some of the petty thefts or whatever that happened don't bother me as much as some people. The poverty is bothering just because there's poverty, but seeing it doesn't like uh, make me curl away from those people like there's something wrong with them. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
There's still people. So me and my wife, we have a different perspective about the things here. So like we see that in some of the expat bubbles that they stay in their own bubble, and that can be detrimental to you if you're in a foreign country. And you got to understand that like these expats could come and go. The people in this country are going to stay here. So we came with the idea that like, okay, we're just going to be self reliant on each other. If anyone comes into our bubble, that's on them. We're not getting into anyone else's bubble because we stayed in our own little bubble back in the States. We didn't bother people. We didn't invite people over all the time. We didn't have parties. We didn't go to a lot of parties. We did a lot of fishing and whatnot. And we were fine with that. So coming here, we can see from the outside how some of those bubbles get like really exclusive and then like really negative or maybe overly positive. But either way, it's like we didn't come here to be with other Americans. If we happen to be, then we're fine with that. But that's not what we're looking for. we're looking to be part of the Ecuadorian culture as much as we can,
You
while
didn't move
still
away
just kind of
from
enjoying
America
ourselves.
to bring America with you.
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
Which is the reason. This is really the only reason that we don't live in Manta. Cuenca and Quito is just because of the altitude. My wife really can't deal with the altitude.
Right.
But the reason we don't live in Manta isn't because it isn't like a decent city. It's just because there's too much like Americanism in our opinion.
There's an
But I'm
expat
not trying to
bubble.
down the city, but
Right.
right.
There's an expat
And
bubble, and those, when you're near one of those, it has gravity. It pulls you in, because it's
right.
familiar and it's easy. Um, so when you are near one of those expat bubbles, it is very hard not to just get drawn in and become a part of it.
Yeah. And I think that like with attitudes, we've met some fantastic people here, like expats. And I'm not even talking about Ecuadorian. Almost all Ecuadorians we meet are wonderful. Like if you talk to an Ecuadorian for 2 minutes, you're like best friends forever. You
Right.
know, like you exchange numbers and like they're like, hey, what are you doing? Blah.
Right.
It's great. It's really refreshing,
Right.
honestly.
Incredibly friendly people.
Yeah, yeah. And some of the expats we've met are just the most down to earth, uh, just regular, good old people that you could possibly meet. And then there's some that are like, man, are you really just talking to me to be nosy? You know what I'm saying? Like that. There's certain questions you ask because I can tell you this: when me and my wife meet anyone, there are questions we never ask, and it's like the typical questions like, hey, how long you been here? If I've never met you before, how long you been here? Blah blah blah. Um, and that's usually about the deepest question I'm going to ask. I don't need to know what you did for a living before you got here, or what you do for work while you're here, where your kids are, and we get those questions all the time. And I'm like, how is this really relevant? If I had kids here, and I'm not even trying to be a smart ass, I'm just saying like if I had kids here, and you see me and her at the mall, well, if we had kids, they'd be with me here at the mall. So like that's really not a question to ask. I don't, and even if it is, like, why is it important?
Right.
To me, I just don't get it. Like, because we never ask these questions to people. So, but it seems like maybe they don't get the hint. I don't know. Like, what's your name? How long you been here?
Yeah.
Hey, nice to meet you.
I hope in our conversations, off camera while we were preparing for this, I wasn't one of those dudes that was just like way too
No, no,
nosy,
no, no.
too curious enough in your business. I
No.
tend to be a very curious person, and I ask a lot of questions. But discussing other expats and the expat attitudes and the expat vloggers here that paint a very rosy picture, or others that paint a very negative picture, is probably a good segue into talking about the media and the
Yeah.
current crisis here. And as people that are here on the ground, that disconnect between the doom and gloom media and just the business of crisis and what
Yeah.
we experience and what we see. Um, and like I noticed this just in my YouTube videos, where like normally my videos are talking about places I'm visiting, or my garden, my farm, my family, what we're up to. And but my videos, I'm always talking about what is going on in my life. So when there was a crisis in Ecuador, that was what was going on in my life. And I put out some videos about it, and they blew up like crazy. And I was like, oh, I get it. Like this is why the media focuses on crisis, because it is
If
good
it bleeds, it
business.
leads.
Yeah, it's good business. So um, it was, I knew that was real. I knew that. Buenos tardes, neighbor. I knew that was real. I knew that existed, but I had never really experienced it as directly. Like if you watch the news reports about Ecuador in the last 2-3 weeks, it's doom and gloom, and it's a lot darker, and it makes it sound a lot more dangerous than it actually is. So like on the one hand, you've got expats that are putting out videos and they're like, everything's fine here. I don't see any problem. Cuenca's totally safe, um, or Bicabamba is totally safe. And on the other hand,
Right.
you have these media reports that take some terrible incident that happened, and report it in a way where they make it seem like that is the way it is everywhere all the time.
Right.
Um, Terrible things happen. It's life. Life has bad moments, terrible moments,
Hmm.
and Ecuador does have a lot of crime at the moment. But just because something terrible happens doesn't mean it is completely dangerous all the time. Is my perspective. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I have a feeling it's something fairly similar.
Yeah, yeah. So like if I was to tell somebody like what's it like here, right? I'd have to say that look, it's the same other than the curfew, it's the same as it was before the curfew. Robberies still happen in Salinas. Um, like that hasn't stopped.
Right.
But I do appreciate the presence. I do appreciate, the increased security around. Um, I do see the military guys on the trucks. I see the police officers, patrolling more. I see them responding more. I can look down on my balcony. I see them pulling people over, guys on motorcycles, pulling them over and checking them. And I appreciate that. We can say whatever we want about like, human rights and stuff. Now, there's definitely some human rights violations going on between the cops and some of these guys. That aside, this yeah, I don't agree with that because at some point that becomes too much, and then those people start rebelling, and that just makes it more difficult for the police to do their job. But I will absolutely say that like I appreciate the effort. I do appreciate what the president's doing, but as far as safety, like none of the precautions that we were taking before have changed. We do the exact same things. That now does that mean it's safe? No, it just means it's the same as it was before. The news was talking about Ecuador. If I wouldn't say that I'm totally safe. Although I will say this: I am much safer, whether before or after the crisis. I am much safer going out and walking without anything on me. That's just a fact of life here in Ecuador. If
Yeah.
if I'm not going somewhere that requires me to have my phone, I don't have it. If I'm going to a little restaurant to get like a $5 dinner, I just have $10 on me to get two of them,
Right.
and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need my wallet. I don't need
So I just moved households in Quito, and the old neighborhood I was in was El Inca, and it's a middle class neighborhood, but I was on a really rough block in that middle
Yeah,
class neighborhood, and um, yeah, like if I just 2 blocks to the tienda, I take maybe $5. I leave
hmm,
everything else at home. Um, Now there are islands of safety within Quito, and as I mentioned, my wife's Ecuadorian. You probably are aware that Ecuadorians are they're obsessed with crime, and
yeah,
they're very focused on it. And um, under a lot of pressure from my wife, I moved us during this crisis to a much safer neighborhood because
yeah.
she insisted, she'd just get us out of here. So, but I don't feel less safe now than I did before. But that was not true the first couple days of this crisis. There was kind
It
of a
was
tipping
weird.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was kind of a tipping point in the first couple days where the mafias, the cartels, and those that sympathized with them didn't realize that they had no hope of winning this. So
right.
there were people that were acting out more boldly than they had been before because um, they thought it was a free for all. Um,
Hmm.
but very quickly, because of the government's actions, it all reined in. It all reined in.
Yeah,
The media, the media is the media, and they're going to do what they do, and
yeah,
their product is fear, and so they definitely play up how terrible it is here.
yeah.
When the reality is, it's not much different from before. Um, but the reality is also that it was perhaps a little bit worse than people were willing to admit before. And now it's out in
Right,
the open.
right. And I think that like like you were saying that you did a couple videos and they blew up. Well, like I don't get like tons of views on our channel or whatever, but it was
Yet.
double to triple. It was double to triple what I
Right.
would normally get when I did, a couple of videos. And I quickly realized, like, you know what, I don't want to keep feeding into this
Right.
because it's disingenuous from me. It's just me chasing views, and
Right.
like money isn't that important to me. So it's not like YouTube is like breaking the bank, sending me checks or whatever. So I'm like, yeah, no, it isn't worth it for me because I already knew that like the videos that do the best are like real estate videos, which encourage people to come here, videos about immigration to Ecuador, and crime
Right.
and carnival. Like for whatever reason, talking about carnival, it gets a lot of views. But
People like to
um,
party.
yeah, so but I don't want that to be like everything that we're about. I'd like to talk about other things, like the medical system here. Like I did a whole video about how to sign up for IESS because I know people that it's almost impossible if you don't have someone walking you through it to actually do it.
Right.
No one watches that video. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right. Yeah.
like I try to do things that are helpful.
Right. Same. I've got some videos that I'm like, why is this video tanking? This is actually some of the most important content, right? Like this is what people
Right,
need to
right.
understand. Not, not how to buy a house here, but um, yeah, it's so
Because anyone can come and buy property if you want. Like it's so easy. I mean, I'm
yeah,
not saying it's easy, but like it's if you got the money, you can do it.
right,
But when it comes to like your actual daily life, like, well, how do I get a phone plan, or how do I get a temporary, prepaid SIM card,
right.
or how do I
How do you
sign up for
pay your
medical insurance?
utilities? Like,
Right. Like I have a whole video about like an app. I have an app that can pay almost any utility,
right,
straight from your phone. You don't have to go anywhere. But whatever, like signing up for a bank account, stuff like that. That's for whatever reason, people don't want to watch that. But that's the stuff that you actually need if you live here.
right. I totally hear that. I totally hear that. And it is it's a trap, and you see how a lot of people get caught in it, whether
Yeah.
it's mainstream media or YouTubers, whatever, producing that negative shock value, you know, bad news content, because it
Yeah.
sells, because it
Yeah.
rewards them. They get rewarded for doing it, and so um, yeah, it's a trap. And if YouTube is everything to you, and you're trying to make a living from it, yeah, some
Right.
people are going to go that route.
Yeah. I
Just
don't
like
care enough.
yeah, yeah,
I was actually glad that I did I spoke to a reporter um, recently, and he was a freelance reporter with USA Today, and he talked to us. I wanted to see what he was talking about. He talked to a friend of ours in Cuenca, and she actually referred him to us. So I said, okay. She told us what he was saying, and it wasn't like he was chasing. He wasn't chasing like what's the word I'm looking for? He wasn't chasing some sensational story. You know what I'm saying?
right,
He wanted to know like what's the reality of your lives. And what kind of caught me was that like the person that sent us his information, it was a black woman, and he reached out to her first. So we're like, okay. Ordinarily, when someone wants to reach out to an expat in Ecuador, it isn't like a black person.
right,
So just the fact that he was reaching out like that, I'm like, okay, maybe I want to talk to him and see what he's got to say.
right,
And I'm kind of glad I did because he put a really like it wasn't like a rosy positive article that he put up on USA Today. It was really just like, what's the reality of life for expats, and maybe why did they come here, even with all the stuff that's going on. So he didn't try to say like, oh, it's great. He didn't try to say it's terrible. He was just trying to like, what's your life like, and what do you feel about what's going on? And
in other words,
I was
he was one
when I
of the
saw the
rare,
article,
right,
right?
he's one
Yeah,
of
when
the
I
rare
saw the
non
article, I was like,
asshole
okay,
reporters.
he kept it real. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like the media, man, the media can be, all over the place. I think one thing that kind of leads me into something else, unless you have something else to point out about
No, no,
media.
no. Take it away.
Okay. One thing that doesn't get talked about enough is something we've talked about offline is like the culture of like trash, number one.
Mm.
So like here in Salinas, trash is an issue. There are
Yep.
places where, and let me back up. The guys who pick up the trash, right? The song is playing on the garbage truck, and they come around three
Right.
times a day where I live. They're they're freaking wonderful. If I could catch those guys and just hand them a pack of Coca Colas, I would,
Yep.
because they hustle even when it's blazing out there.
Yep.
And I really thank those guys. The problem is that people treat the street like it's a trash can, and the trash
Right.
guys can't pick up everything. They're picking up from the trash cans.
Right. That
And I've
and
seen people
also
finish a bottle and just throw it on the ground.
right. The culture of throwing your trash everywhere, of littering, combined with the street dogs that are hungry, that are
Yeah,
any bag of trash out
tearing it
anywhere,
up.
they're going to tear it open, and then you've got just trash strewn everywhere. Um,
Yeah,
so where I live, the nearest towns, and part of what first put me onto this area, I was so used to that culture in Ecuador, and I rolled through this little town, and I was like, "Whoa, the streets are clean. The
yeah,
streets are clean here. Something's different, right?" So like, um, but then the road between here and Quito, I call it the Ruta Basura, the route of garbage.
yeah.
So, it's a road on the outskirts of Quito, and you have not just the typical truck drivers and just people passing in cars throwing their garbage out the window, but it is also a very popular place for businesses that have more trash than they know what to do with to just dump it. So you'll see car parts, you'll see a bunch of garbage from restaurants, you'll see garbage from remodeling houses, um, and this is an amazing area. So this is a dry forest. It's a just beautiful, incredible environment with a lot of wildlife. There's the Andean foxes, which are actually they're a wolf that has evolved to look like a
Yeah.
fox. And there's condors, there's hawks, there's eagles, there's a ton of wildlife out there. But then there is just this massive amount of garbage, and it is also sadly a place that is very popular for people to dump unwanted pets. So there's a bunch of stray dogs out
Yeah.
there, um, and it's my pet peeve. It's there is one thing that I hate. I use that word hesitantly, but I hate about the Ecuadorian culture even more than the crime and instability that's happening now, and that is this irresponsible culture of just dumping your trash everywhere and letting someone else worry about it. Um,
Yeah.
it kills me. It kills me because it is such a beautiful country, and it is also a place that is so dependent on tourism. It's so dependent on pristine natural environments and selling itself as a tourist destination, and then it shits on it.
Yeah.
The people
Yeah.
just shit all over it. Um, there was I caught a clip on YouTube the other day in the Galapagos on New Year's, and the person was talking about like the fee you pay to go to the Galapagos and what it goes to, and then they showed just massive firework displays and the aftermath and all these like fireworks all over the beaches and all over
Yeah.
the Galapagos Islands, and there is I love this culture. I love the people, but there are some blind spots in the culture, and I've always had this attitude. We come here as Americans with our own particular culture, and we shouldn't tell the Ecuadorians what to do. We shouldn't,
Right.
pretend like our culture is better. But if you flip the scenario and you talked about cultures coming to the U.S., they also bring some benefit, some things that are different,
Mm-hmm.
some their own cultures, and they shouldn't be asked to give them up either. We should have the ability and the just good sense to pull the best things from different cultures. So
Yeah.
I in Ecuador, yeah, I want to learn Ecuadorian patience and kindness, um,
Yeah.
and and at the same time, I don't want to lose American sense of personal responsibility and a willingness to clean up after yourself, not just throw your trash out wherever. A willingness
Yeah.
to behave in socially responsible ways because you see a bigger picture. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a sensitive topic because Ecuadorians they hate like they can shit on their own culture. They can talk about the things that are wrong about their culture, but if somebody else does it, they get pissed. there's a chip on
Yeah.
their shoulder, that chip on their shoulder stems from a fundamental understanding that there are some problems and there some things to be ashamed of about the way their fellow countrymen behave. And one of them is the way people treat animals here, and the other is um, people just throwing garbage everywhere or polluting in other terrible ways. Whether it's just pouring, changing their oil on their boat and dumping it on the beach, or
Yeah.
that kind of behavior where they're so dependent on tourism for the economy to thrive and for them to have better lives, and yet they are destroying it.
To your point, I think that like if you think about, there are a lot of things here in Ecuador that are like the U.S. 40 years ago. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
if you if you think about like littering, like you were saying, I remember as a kid when littering became a big deal, and when it was like there were commercials on TV about like not littering, and
Right.
they put signs up on highways about don't litter and stuff like that because it was really common.
Right.
It's just the same as like people not wearing seatbelts back in the states and in the early '80s, where until they say, "Hey, you're going to make it a law for you people wear seatbelts." Like, what? Wear a
Right.
seatbelt? That's crazy.
Right.
So it's one of those
You're
things
taking away
where
my
like
freedom.
there needs right,
Taking away my freedom to
we're,
fly through the windshield.
right. Like no, we're trying to prevent people from dying. And eventually it caught on. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that something similar has to happen here. We did a video with a friend of ours named Jennifer. She lives on the other side of Salinas, on the other coast, on the peninsula, not far from here. And she has a dog rescue. And one of the issues that she has is on the beach that she's on. It's a non-swimming beach because the waves are too strong.
I
But there's
know it.
trash
I
all over.
tried. I tried to swim there once. It was terrible.
Yeah, Mar Bravo is terrible. Yeah. So there's like a culture of that, and it has to be like you got to start at some point, whether it be
Right.
like I don't know, small fines or just maybe get some crews, get some young people, hire them to come out and clean up, and just so that people see it, and then eventually they say, oh well, maybe we should stop littering. It'll take a long time to get there, but you got to
Right.
start somewhere.
I,
And the
I had
dogs,
this.
the same thing. Same thing with the dogs.
I had this idea on the Ruta the Basura, the road between here and Quito. I had this idea. So already there's signs up saying there's cameras and don't litter, but everyone knows there's no cameras. And then at one point,
Right.
somebody set up a camera on a pole, and it took about a week for that camera to be vandalized. Um, I had this idea, like, hey, why not get some like wildlife cameras, like trail cameras,
Yeah.
and hide them, in the forest, looking out at the places that are popular dumping spots, and create a Facebook group, and basically a Facebook group that exposed and shamed the people that were, especially the businesses that were out there just doing massive dumping, catching who they are and their license plates, and my wife was like, don't do that, like somebody will get pissed and retaliate, like um, I'm still thinking about it. I'd love to. I'm not sure if it is a good idea or not, but like if the government's hands weren't so full with other stuff, there's more
Mhm.
pressing issues here right now.
Yeah.
Um, it would be great if they had the time and the resources to do a public awareness campaign and start pushing the needle to change the culture. But I don't see it happening soon if it is something that comes from the government. I do see a lot of Ecuadorians beginning, like the newer generations, beginning to change attitudes towards animals, and hopefully they will also adopt those sort of attitudes towards the environment and
Yeah.
destroying this paradise.
Yeah, especially with like sea turtles and like there's so many animals and things that are negatively affected by the trash. And I don't want to act like this is exclusively an Ecuador issue
It's
because
a
all over
it's
Latin America trash is an issue and other parts of the world.
it was in Asia too. Like I've got friends in Thailand and Philippines and places like that, and they're like, yeah, it's same here. It's a garbage
Yeah.
fire, literally.
Yeah.
Like, it's a
Yeah.
garbage fire in the front yard, right next to the garden. Like
Right. I wanted to ask you about infrastructure. Like when you come from another country, because and I'm going to get to the reason I'm asking you this, but
right,
infrastructure here in Ecuador. the reality versus like expectations from people who come in from another country. And the reason I'm asking is because like I think there's a disconnect.
Buenas
So
tardes. Bien, bien.
neighbors.
Yo hablamos. Hasta luego.
It's nice having nice neighbors.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
um, but yeah, what I was going to say was like in the States, right? There's there's the people who are kind of okay with the system as it is, even though they know there's corruption, there's things that are messed up. They know money doesn't always go where it should, blah blah blah, right?
Right.
But they also know that you know what, I can get in my car, I can go to anywhere. There's a paved road, there's stop signs, there's street lights, there's hospitals I can go to anywhere, you know, almost anywhere in the country. I can hop in a nice equipped ambulance. The police will respond. The fire departments are well equipped. Just overall infrastructure. Now,
Things work.
some of those people in the states, right? Some of those people in the states will say, "Well, why do I have to pay this tax? Why do I have to pay this tax? Why is there a city tax? Why is there this? Why is there that?" Well, what do you think most of that money is going? And I was a city employee, so I understood a lot of what that stuff went to. Um,
Right.
but those same people will come to a country like Ecuador and say, "Well, why don't they?" They'll say like, "Oh, I'm so glad the taxes are so low here."
Right.
But at the same time, they'll say, "Well, why don't they fix the roads and put streetlights up and have better hospitals?" Well, you can't. You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. You can't hate taxes in one place and then love it somewhere else and then
Right.
complain about two different things. So
It
I just
is.
want to know your thoughts on that.
It's human nature to want to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
It's just human nature for people to want services and not want to pay for them. For me, in maybe in part because before I came to Ecuador, I was out contracting in Afghanistan. Um, the lack of infrastructure here wasn't a shock; it was a step up. you know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and for me personally, I prefer a place where um, I prefer it here. I prefer
Yeah.
the cost of living be very low, and you have to be resourceful and careful because there might be a big hole in the middle of the road. Um,
Yeah.
the road might be washed out, and you might have to be patient and wait a day before you can get to where you're going. Um, and like right now, I crashed my motorcycle. My ACL tendon is disconnected from my knee, and I need surgery. Right, so like I am not super stoked on the hospitals, the surgeons around here. I consulted with a bunch of folks, and they were like, for that type of surgery, you have better options elsewhere. And so I'm gonna fly to Bogota and get it done there for less than it would cost here. Um,
Yeah.
I prefer, and I think this is because for me personally, I like a little challenge and I like having to be resourceful. For me personally, I prefer this environment where things don't always work right and it's a little bit of an adventure and sometimes a little trying, but also I'm not paying for things I don't want or need. Um,
True.
there are definitely going to be a lot of people that do not share my view. And their view is valid. Like if you're older and you've got a lot of healthcare needs, and you talked about IESS. I've had some terrible experiences with IESS. Specifically, I've never carried it myself, but I have for my family. And when my wife was pregnant, she went into labor early and she rushed to the government hospital in Quito. And they were like, "Yeah, we're too busy." And she's like,
Yeah.
"I'm in labor." Like, what do you mean you're too busy?
Yeah.
And at the point where she started bleeding, she's like, "Fine, all right." And she took a taxi to a private hospital, and we paid $7,000 out of pocket. And if she hadn't, my son would have died, and she might have
Yeah.
died. Um,
Yeah.
so things don't work right here, and you have to be resourceful, and you have to have the resources to be able to take care of yourself in an emergency.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, but if you do, and if you are prepared to live that way, in the long run, it's probably more rewarding and more fulfilling to deal with those. inconveniences, but be more self-reliant.
Yeah. And I always, I always kind of grew up with the the idea of just being able to have a cool story to tell somebody. You know what I'm saying? So like if everything's perfect, you never have any cool stories to tell. You can always embellish it a little bit. Like, yeah, I got this scar when I wrestled a caiman in Ecuador, or some shit.
Right.
All I did was fall off a bike or something. But anyway, like when everything is too perfect, like you said, there's no adventure in it. And
Right.
I really appreciate just like I can't just hop in a car because I don't have one, and we're still going to contemplate maybe getting one.
Right.
But I got a scooter,
Right.
and I can zip around on my little scooter and go go to the grocery store, and just having that freedom to kind of just choose whatever I want to do, rather than because I have a car or I have to take my car to this place because I have a car. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
There's options. I can take the bus, I can walk, I can take my scooter, and yeah, the infrastructure isn't the best. It could definitely use some improvements.
Oh,
Yes, we've had up
it's
and down experiences.
gloriously terrible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if they improved it, if people would improve their driving. I doubt it, but
No.
there are, it's yeah,
They
everything's with
recently,
suggestion here.
so up at my farm, they recently paved a big part of the road coming up here, and which was tragic because it was this cool old cobblestone road, and I was like,
Uh,
redo it as cobblestone. Don't put down pavement. But they paved it, and immediately there were more accidents on that road because everyone just started speeding, right? Because it's paved
yeah.
now, right? But it's still a crazy steep, curvy, mountainous road. So,
Yeah.
no, they make the infrastructure, the roads better. You're gonna have a terrible few months where people have to realize they can't just speed like madmen on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's insane.
yeah, so like I don't like I'd like to think I don't chase cool stories. They just sort of find me. Like
Yeah.
I just do my thing, but I happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time a lot. um,
Yeah.
I'd love to go fishing with you sometime.
Absolutely.
Um, Either out there
Absolutely.
or if you're up in this neck of the woods, do a little trout fishing, one of the
Yeah.
mountain lakes up here. And yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
And I want to pick your brain on aquaponics
Electrical?
and some of the farming. Well,
Oh yeah.
whatever you're doing, because like the setup that I had in mind was maybe get a couple of solar panels just to keep the pump going and if the power went out, and some batteries. Um, I had
I
different
am
things in mind about how to do it.
I'm learning as I go, and I am not an expert yet. Right now, all I've got is the pond and
Yeah,
some tilapia that really wish I had a pump.
yeah,
um, but so I don't like I'm doing a lot of reading and I'm researching, but I am you'll find better information on YouTube from people that have
yeah,
already learned from their mistakes. And that's what
yeah.
I'm doing right now is just watching them and trying to figure out what the hell am I doing. Like so,
Right.
um, when I have my system fully built, because it's not yet and it's up and running, I'd be happy to basically give you a breakdown on how I built it and what I learned along the way. But right now, I'm still just making mistakes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's cool. Um, Jesse, man, I really appreciate you doing this. It's been a great conversation. It's just really cool to talk to somebody that can have a nuanced view of the country and have a lot of like experience that isn't just travel experience. It's like life experience in other places, um, whether it be dangerous or cool or whatever. And get a chance to speak to somebody like that. So, like I said, once again, I really appreciate it. And for anyone watching, if for whatever reason you know who I am but you don't know who he is, um, his would you go ahead and re plug
Yeah,
your
it's
channel?
so it's the Fall Off the Map channel. Pretty easy to find on YouTube if you just search for Fall Off the Map in Ecuador. I'll probably come up as one of the first hits, if not second or third. And yeah, no, this has been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I hope that your audience will enjoy it, and I hope it provides some useful information for everyone out there. I think it will.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon. Ciao.
Peace out.